Chris grits his teeth slightly as he threw the jaguar's body aside. The animal was quite heavy and seemed to be bigger than a lion. He stood up and looked around. The water from the river behind him was flowing to the abyss below. The ground had been destroyed by the laboratory. Wesker was clever, and as much as they have equipment to circumvent the site's protection, they must have imagined that would put him in microchips in the animal's head as a form of protection. That's how he knew they were there. It had to be. "Is everyone all right?" he asked his man, who seemed to be all fine, despite having taken by surprise. "I can't access our system, but there don't seem to be any hostile creatures nearby," his man said on his left. Finn, very young, but very smart. "You heard. Let's stick to the plan. Let's get back to formation," Chris said, taking the lead and walking down towards the destroyed ground without letting any of his men say anything else. As he approached, his eyes surveyed into the abyss below. The laboratory was immense. The ground beneath them had been practically hollow, supported by only metal beams and columns, with a layer of steel just below the ground. Whoever built that place sure took a long time, and certainly spent a lot of money. It was surprising on how such place existed without arousing any suspicion. "Alpha A, ready to enter the laboratory. Descending," he communicated through his communicator, and signaled to his men, who took some rope and tied them tightly to where they could. "Copy. Alpha B approaching from the west, approximately 150 meters. Over." "Alpha C from the east. There's what looked like a river entrance. Over." "Alpha D from the south, descending." Chris nodded and turned to his men, grabbing one of the ropes soon after, leaping into the abyss below. He let himself down quickly, landing softly on the metal below and raising his rifle almost immediately, running his eyes around the search of hostiles and watching for some crows that were still around. His men followed close behind, and they walked along the metal walkway. They were just above the corridor that led to the dome. His corridor was surrounded by metal walls, pretty sturdy, but they were prepared. They stood in a circular position, while two of their men knelt down in a certain spot and took some equipment out of their bags. Lucas took out a special type of blowtorch, while his partner Noah took out that of adhesive. Both soldiers began to cut a hole in the metal, while the others waited. In less than 5 minutes, they managed to open the place up, and Finn took out a device, knelt down in front of the hole, and put the device down, checking to see if there was anything else in the corridor before they went down. Waving to Chris when he saw that there was nothing, Redfield was the first to go down, raising his rifle in both directions in the corridor and taking 2 steps forward, giving the others room to go down behind him. Behind him was the dome, so he moved forward towards and leaned against the wall next to the metal door. Finn ran over to it and knelt down in front of the door with another device in his hand. The device had a small greenish screen, and in a matter of moments, the metal door opened. They got back in position. After a nod, Chris opened the door and quickly went inside, checking the elevator next door to the stairs ahead. Signaling that everything was clear, they quickly followed the winding staircase that spiraled down. The place was huge, as they had descended step by step, and there seemed to be no end. The stairs were made of sturdy steel and reinforced industrial-grade handrails, echoing each step they took. However, quietly, they made some of the little anxious. They finally reached the end of the stairs, and they passed through a door, checking the elevator again before moving on. Ahead, they emerged to a corridor suspended high above a metal walkway, where they could see the vast expanse of the facility from its vantage point. A maze of interconnected chambers and workspaces that should have been teeming with human activity. However, all they saw were infected. The curious thing that didn't seem to be an outbreak. The place was tidy and clean for those infected have escaped from their confinement. The lamps were still on, and the equipment was still working. The floor was clean, and everything showed signs of recent human activity. Wesker must have put these infected here on purpose. The place was full of hunters, lickers, and the most curious thing was the people. Well, not exactly people. Their skin was extremely pale, and their eyes were red and behaved like addicts. Infected, that's for sure. Infected with what? He didn't have an exact answer, but he did have a few ideas. Alpha A, confirming encounter with the infected in the north wing, he said through the communicator, running his eyes around quickly. Following the metal walkway, he reached the steps leading down below. Before he started to descend, he ran his eyes over his men briefly. Weapons silenced. Let's take them out without making too much noise, he said, nodding to them before descending the steps. He raised his rifle and fired at the licker on the wall in front of him. The creature grunted in surprise and pain and ended up falling to the ground, shot by several more shots, not only from Chris, but from the other soldiers as well. The licker's grunt was enough to distract the attention of the other infected, who began to run towards the soldiers in furious mob with mixed shrieks. Chris turned his rifle and fired at the hunter that had jumped towards him, hitting the creature while it was still in the air and causing it to miss its attack. Falling and rolling a few times on the ground, and then he aimed his rifle at the pale man in front of him, who raised his arm towards him. Redfield's eyes widened slightly as he saw the man's arm had become deformed, and had a huge claw surrounded by the black tentacles formed in a place of limb. The man had tried an uppercut, but Chris dodged it, stepping it to the side. He then counterattacked with the point-blank shots at the man's head, causing the infected to fall to the ground and struggle in apparent pain. "Type 3 Rapper, go!" he shouted, and the men then moved away from each other, forming a small groups of two, and some were left at some certain points alone, with Chris still in the lead. His eyes widened as the licker leapt towards him from the ceiling. However, he was quicker than the creature and ducked, dodging as it advanced. Behind him, the other soldier called his peers, shot the licker with his machine gun, dodging the attack from the hunter soon after. "Concussion grenade!" Finn shouted, and as the soldiers took cover, the grenade exploded, causing the surrounding lickers to fall to the ground in stunned grunts, and their eardrums temporarily injured. Chris grabbed his knife and plunged it into the neck of the infected woman, pulling her towards him and kicking her towards the hunter in front of him. The creature, despite not having its head attack cancelled, it slowed its advance, and Chris shot it with the remaining bullets still in the magazine of his rifle. The man quickly reloaded his weapon, looking around the short space of time he had. The air grew colder, carrying it with the faint smell of ozone and machinery. Along the walls, observation windows give glimpses of each various researcher's area, showing small parts of the experiment and research being carried out. Some of the computers were still on. His attention was drawn by the sound of rapid footsteps, and in front of him, a licker was running towards him. The creature was fast and tough, and as it didn't seem to feel any of the shots that pierced its body. The licker leapt towards him, its claws extended in front of its body, ready to pierce the man. However, Chris dodged by ducking, and quickly turned to warn Pierce behind him. However, the soldier was skillful, and dodged moments before killing it hit with its claws, reloading his machine gun and firing at the licker. Chris stood up, and advanced on the infected man that stood in front of him, hitting him with a strong punch to the face, leaving him disoriented. Before he could do anything, however, a hunter tried to attack him with its claws, and the soldier was forced to dodge. However, the man he had punched was soon hit by a shot of one of his soldiers, and Chris was able to focus on the hunter in front of him, placing the barrel of his rifle against the creature's neck and firing up until the clip ran out of bullets. His team coordination was good. In a matter of minutes, they cleared the place. The floor was covered in infected bodies and blood, the walls scarred with bullets and claw marks. Chris reloaded his rifle and ran towards his men. "Anyone hurt?" he asked. The soldiers checked each other out. "No, sir," the man in charge of the medical treatment, Austin, replied. "Good, check the rooms," Chris said, beckoning Pierce to follow him, and they both headed towards the rooms ahead. Chris kicked open the aluminum door, and they entered with rifles raised. The research room was clean and the computer was on. There was still some documents on the small table, and a glass of coffee. How cold! Now next to some files. Chris walked over to the computer while Pierce took a look at the back office. Malaria rates have increased in recent years. The Amazon River, the largest river in the world, is also the largest river by volume of discharge, contributing around 20% of total river discharge into the oceans as well. The hell? Chris muttered to himself as he read the research. It didn't seem to have to do anything with bioterrorism, just a survey of the region. However, this was also worrying because the river of such importance throw a dangerous virus into the waters and damaging would be disastrous. It was likely that Wesker planned to use it at some point. Sir, he turned to focus his gaze on Lucas, who was standing in front of the door with his rifle in hand. This place is clear. We haven't found anything, but there have been signs of human activity recently. We found a bottle of coffee that was still hot. Lucas explained and Chris walked away from the site. There's no one here but them, Pierce said, pointing to the bodies of the infected people lying on the ground. What do you expect from a complete psychopath? Chris said, signaling for his team to regroup. Alpha C here. We have had a encounter with some infected, but we've encountered a slightly bigger problem. His communicator beeped with Parker's voice. Alpha A, what is it? Chris asked. We found a missile, sir. American. There were some empty compartments of size of glass vials aside. It looks ready to launch, Parker explained, and Chris growled low. Copy. Location? He asked, glancing towards the third map on his watch. Launch control room, northeast to the facility. The area is surrounded by the command center, security monitoring room, and some storage areas. Copy that. We're on our way. We'll let Finn take a look. Copy. Stand by. Over. They ended the communication, and Chris turned to his team. Let's meet up with Alpha C. Reload your weapons and let's get going, Chris said, turning shortly afterwards and walking towards the front door. Chris opened the door, and just as the last man in the formation entered the next room, the alarm sounded. The red lights came on and Chris growled lowly as he saw all the cages in the room opened. That room contained of infected animals trapped in electronic cages with reinforced bars or completely closed. There was a glass room in the corner with a huge creature sitting on the floor. His creature was now standing up and stretching its enormous limbs out of its back. The thing looked like a huge cockroach. Run! Chris shouted as he saw bars starting to come down in front of the door behind him, and then he ran towards some exit with the grenade in his hand, knowing that they would be trapped in there if they weren't quick enough. The infected creatures and animals came out of their cages and immediately attacked the small group of soldiers. Chris threw the grenade towards a small group of infected. The grenade exploded before they got close, breaking up the small group and throwing the infected away, forming a cloud of smoke mixed with blood. Chris passed through the cloud, and as he did so, his eyes widened at the sight of the cockroach-like creature right in front of him, with its fangs bared into its many arms, ready to grab him. Quickly the man threw himself down, sliding along the ground while kicking the side of the creature's leg, bringing it to its knees. Behind him, Pierce rotated the body and landed a powerful kick to the side of what appeared to be the monster's head, sending it crashing to the ground. Then came Lucas, who fired his shotgun at the creature, buying more time for the others to run with them. A licker had landed just in front of Chris, who gritted his teeth, and the creature raised his huge arm to attack him. However, Chris was quicker and landed a high kick to its head, knocking the creature to the side. Pierce found himself facing two hunters, who watched as Chris ran past them, but focused their attention on Pierce. The soldier grabbed his magnum and fired at the hunter on his right, then taking advantage of the cages in front of him, he leapt towards the shelf and, taking advantage of the momentum once again, jumped over the hunter, who, distracted, and shot with the shotgun by Lucas, who was following close behind. Pressing his rifle against the neck of the cockroach-like creature, he took out his machete and cut out one of the limbs of the monster that had tried to attack him. Still holding the machete, Chris dives the blade into the creature's neck and pushes it back, using it as a shield for the attack by a licker, which pierced the cockroach monster's back with its huge claws. Moving away, Chris throws a grenade at the feet of both monsters, focuses his gaze on the freight elevator ahead. He advanced towards the freight elevator. Within moments, the grenades exploded, throwing both creatures away. Concussion grenade! Finn shouted just behind. In an instant, grenade exploded. The soldiers advanced towards the elevator. As they entered, Chris fired at the infected, who tried to go after him, but with being stunned by the grenade, together he pressurized bullets, prevented the infected from advancing any further steps, and the elevator doors closed. Sighs were heard throughout the elevator, along with the sounds of guns being reloaded. Chris turned around as he reloaded his rifle and ran his eyes over his men. "Noah, you're hurt," he said, and the man began to look at the side of his arm, with the claw marks on the deep side of his bicep. "A hunter grazed me, sir. It's no big deal," Noah said. "Still, Austin better look at that and bandage that wound," Chris said, and Austin went straight to work, bandaging Noah's arm after the man sat down. The elevator doors opened, and the soldiers advanced along the corridor. The place looked like a garage, what there looked like to be a warehouse next to it. There were several vehicles parked there, military vehicles, trucks, vans, and even some planes and helicopters. Looking around, he focused his gaze on the door, and they had to pass through to get out to Alpha C. However, before he could do anything, he felt his skin crawl. Suddenly the weather turned colder, and his instincts screamed. Chris turned quickly, and all he could see was the figure above him. In pure reflex, he dodged it by throwing himself to the side. The soldier quickly got to his feet, only to see Pierce and Lucas being thrown aside, and Finn being knocked to the ground. Chris gritted his teeth as he recognized the blonde figure, and raised his rifle. However, if he knew Wesker well, he knew he would dodge, and he wouldn't risk hitting one of his men. Grabbing his machete, Chris advanced it towards the men, who grabbed Noah by the neck and threw him towards him, at the same time hitting Austin in the leg, bringing him to his knees, and finishing him off with a kick to the face, literally sending the man flying to the side. Chris dodged the soldier's body and tried to pierce an attack on Wesker, who easily dodged the side and grabbed his forearm with his right arm, and encountered with the left arm, and hitting an open hand blow to Chris's chin. Redfield gritted his teeth but recovered quickly, only to be elbowed to the side in the face and thrown to the ground. "Chris, ignorant, searching, still playing hero, I see," Wesker said in his usual arrogant tone, so convinced that he was superior, even with still in his words. "Captain!" Pierce shouted, firing at Wesker, who leapt back away from Chris, and had teleported around the room with the uphuman skill. Chris lunged at Pierce, hitting him in the chest, sending him flying with his attack. Chris quickly got up and wiped the blood that ran down the side of his mouth, and remembered the conversation he had with Hunk some time ago. "Keep your distance, but do not shoot. He could teleport, but only certain distances. He'll dodge your bullets and approach at the same time. But if you let him attack first, you'll be able to see his advance, and in a short time, the timing has to be perfect. But there is a chance." Wesker turned to face Chris, his eyes hidden from the sunglasses. He looked almost fed up, as if he wanted inconvenience, had already taken up too much of his patience. "I don't have time for your little encounter, Chris, unfortunately. This ends here," Wesker said. Chris just snorted. "There won't be an after for you, Wesker," Chris said. "Go stick to the plan." "Captain," Pierce tried to intervene. "Get going. I'll be right behind," Chris said, packing up his machete and getting to the attack position. Chris's men got up from the ground and went on their way, with Lucas helping Austin to walk. Wesker glanced at them, sighing in annoyance and turning to Chris. "It won't make any difference. I'll take care of him for you," Wesker said, fixing his gloves on his hands. "You talk too much," Chris said, and all Wesker did was glance at the watch on his wrist. 7 minutes. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you," Wesker said, smiling and adjusting his glasses as he got into position. Ghost and Claire approached the destroyed area ahead. What had once been a small tribe was now nothing more than a destroyed field, with debris, large pieces of destroyed rock scattered all over the large area, fallen and twisted trees. They watched with serious and somewhat uneasy eyes as they saw what appeared to be a part of the underground laboratory. Now that they knew what had destroyed the ground, Wesker had lifted the laboratory to the surface. There was just a dome just in front of them, and this dome was apparently the upper part of the laboratory, and probably the place where that madman had left those crows. The laboratory was huge, perhaps the largest they had ever seen. It stretched over for at least a kilometer. They had no idea how long the rest of the lab actually was. "Alpha A, ready to enter the laboratory. Descending." They then heard Chris on the comm, and Ghost knelt down on a piece of rock, staring at the abyss below. There appeared to be broken glass room deep below. a room with grass and even a tree, a place to simulate certain biome, perhaps. Elda D from the south descending, he said to his communicator, standing up again and hearing Claire next to him. Descending? And how do you plan that? Jump from here? She asked. But as soon as Ghost's gaze made her realize that he was quite serious. Wait, you're not serious. Hold on to me, he said, picking up his shot. It wasn't as if Claire doubted him. She knew that he wouldn't be serious like that if he wasn't sure, and she just did, and he asked, and wrapped her arms around the man's neck. Ghost leaned forward and let himself fall. Claire squeezed him a little tighter as she felt herself free-falling. But after a few moments, he fired the hook shot, and they began to swing to the ground, where they landed safely. Ghost kept his arm firmly around the woman's waist, who in turn her arms around his neck. Their eyes met for a brief moment before they held each other, until Ghost swallowed some saliva and released her. Blinking a few times as she had woken up from a trance, the woman took a step back. Well, I needed one of those, she said, trying not to look so flustered. I'll lend you mine sometimes, he joked, raising his rifle again, and pointing in the direction of what appeared to be a hospital wing. The place seemed so alive, so to speak. The lights were on and the computers were on. The beds were tidy and some were even messy, as if a patient had just gotten up. However, after checking the place out, there didn't seem to be anyone there. The placeholder was still silent. He signaled Claire to move, and they both walked to the open door of the room, which was open. Ghost checked the corridor quickly, and just like the room, everything was relatively ordered. Nothing out of the ordinary. It just looked like a hospital corridor. They made their way along the path, looking at their watches on their wrists. The system seemed to be back up, and they could see the location of the other teams. Ghost arched a slight eyebrow as he saw the accelerated heartbeats of some of the men. Alpha A, confirming the encounter with the infected in the North Wing. They heard Chris on the communicator, and their silent questions were answered. As they walked, they heard a noise in the background. Claire put her hand on Ghost's shoulder, who signaled him to a specific point in the corridor ahead. She could hear it, wings flapping. Something like a grunt that stirred her senses. There's something over there, she said quietly, and with the half-closed eyes, Ghost raised his rifle towards the noise that was getting louder and louder. Pulling the trigger, he fired in the direction of the noise, and an insect-like creature appeared in midair. Despite its humanoid appearance, the human part was almost unrecognizable. The head was human, with the face that melted in the state and lifeless eyes, with a little hair still attached to the head. The front resembled a woman's torso, its breast still deformed and torn. The legs hanging from the air were clearly deformed, and the skull had split in half, and the brain had morphed, forming like a jaw-like opening that the creature opened freely. Instead of human hands, there were claws in their place, and free wings appeared on each side of its back, wings similar to those of insects. A kind of glass that came out of its back, and the roar that came out of its mouth no longer stirred the senses. They remembered that thing. It was one of the creatures from that damn island. Ghost fired a hail of bullets at the creature, which would only grunt in pain, and fall to the ground from the shots. The man took a long strides forward, only to feel his instincts scream. Out of the ventilation duct came a long gray creature, a blade at the end of its left arm, and a very large hand on its right arm. The creature's mouth outstretched as a superhuman width. Its eyes were gray, and despite the humanoid appearances, the exposed flesh of its body was joined with a kind of exoskeleton. On its back, limbs resemble as insect arms. The creature grabbed the agent and lifted him to the air with extreme ease, pulling his arm back to try to kill him. Claire raised her pistol and fired at the creature. However, her instincts screamed. She heard a muffled footsteps approaching from behind her. The woman turned and crouched quickly, dodging a fatal attack from the insect-like creature. The creature growled and attacked her again, and Claire quickly analyzed it before dodging once more. The creature had 5 sickle-shaped arms, 2 of which were on its back, and just back in the thick neck. It was a mixture of human and some kind of insect-like exoskeleton. The creature was large and heavy, almost reaching the ceiling of the corridor. However, its footsteps were muffled, despite its clear weight. Ghost struggled and kicked the back of the head of the creature holding him, shooting it in the head shortly afterwards. Now free, he spins his body around while it's still in the air and lands softly on the ground. Stepping back, he changed the ammunition on his rifle to armor-piercing bullets. Turning, he throws a grenade towards the fallen monster, in which quickly he dodges the attack from the monster before him. He tried to react, but the monster viciously attacked him with another of its claws. Pressing his other hand against the flat surface of the wall, Ghost leaps into the air and catches the momentum on the wall and leaps over the creature while grabbing its desert eagle. On the monster's back, he placed the barrel of his gun against the creature's neck and fires. The heavy firepower of the gun caused the creature to roar and fall to the ground. Jumping to the side, Ghost takes an aim at the creature's head and fires again, killing the monster by exploding its skull. Behind him, Claire did the same with her pistol, changing her ammunition to armor-piercing bullets. The creature raised his arms and tried to crush her. However, the woman jumped backwards as she fired at the monster's head. Roaring, the creature advanced against the woman and brandishing its arms from left to right. Claire, for her part, dodged herself by throwing herself to the ground and kicking the creature's leg. She propelled herself backwards. The monster was too big and the corridor was too small. In other words, the thing couldn't move around very well. Getting up from the shot from the creature in its knees, in which, due to the armor-piercing bullets, it fell to its knees as it was hit. Quickly, Claire took a grenade from her tactical vest and forced it into the monster's mouth. The grenade exploded, pieces of bone, skin, and blood flew around, and the creature's body fell motionless to the ground. Claire reloaded her pistol and ran her eyes for the corridor, checking that everything was clear. She turned to Ghost, who had done the same. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes, it was no big deal. He was too big for such a small corridor," she replied, and Ghost nodded. "Those two were new," he said, pointing at the creature laying on his feet, and the one that Claire had faced. "Insect hybrids, apparently. Sick son of a bitch," he muttered, more to himself than Claire. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, they both heard a noise coming from the other end of the corridor. Ghost quickly turned with his rifle and raised, and Claire had her pistol ready. They could see what was moving at the glance. "Did you see that?" Claire asked. "It looked like a person. It could be infected," Ghost replied. "Too small to be an adult," Claire said, and he glanced at her. "What is the difference?" he asked, not wanting for an answer and moving on down towards the corridor. Claire stared back for a few moments, but then followed him through the maze of corridors. They all passed an electronic double door and entered what looked like dormitories. For patients, for workers there, they didn't know. All the bedroom doors were open, but there was no one there. No sign of anyone, despite the personal items lying around. Up ahead, they heard something fall, and their guns immediately went to a girl running down the corridor. "Hey, wait!" Claire shouted, and the girl stopped running, turning towards her with her arms clasped against her body in fear. The girl was young, very young. The girl was wearing a long light blue dress. Her brown hair was braided into a ponytail tied with a blue ribbon, and on her feet were gray ballet flats. She looked scared, but otherwise fine, and what made Ghost feel a little more suspicious. "It's okay, you don't have to be afraid," Claire said, raising both hands in the air, approaching at a very slow pace. "Claire," Ghost warned her, and although she didn't look at him, she turned her head in his direction. "A child here? Near those creatures?" he whispered, but Claire just ignored him. She knew it was suspicious to say the least, but at the same time they had no proof that this child had anything to do with it. For all they knew, she could be just another victim. "My name is Claire. What's yours?" she asked, kneeling down in front of the girl, who was alternating her gaze between the woman and the agent behind her with a certain frenzy. "Nadala," the girl replied quietly. "Nadala? You're a very brave girl, Nadala," Claire said. "How did you end up here?" That man brought me here," she said, now somewhat unaware of the approaching Ghost, who stared at her with neutral eyes and kept his rifle lowered. "It must have been awful. We can get you out of here," Claire said, raising her hand towards the girl, who shook it still uncertain, but a little more comfortable. Claire then turned to Ghost, holding the man's gaze for a few moments, until he sighed, reaching for his communicator. "Alpha D, come in," he said, waiting for an answer. "Alpha D calling," Alpha D, come in. The Reaper is unavailable. I'll be in charge for the time being. Ghost bowed his head slightly when he heard Alia's voice. We found a civilian, a child, requesting a team to get her out of here, he said. Alpha C and Alpha A got in touch, Ghost. There is a team on its way to the north wing. I'll mark the location on your map, Alia said. Ghost, I ask you to be quick about it, and when possible, go to the garage, next to the Be-Free storage room. Alpha A has confirmed the confrontation with Albert Wesker. The news made Ghost's eyes widen slightly, and his whole body tense up. Roger that, he said, glancing at the watch on his wrist. The garage, although not exactly on the way, was close enough. The agent turned to the woman, who was looking at him a little anxiously, holding a few questions aside. Let's go, he simply said, taking a lead and walking off at a brisk pace. Stay close to me, okay? Claire said to the young girl next to her, who nodded somewhat frantically, and was brought back some memories of a few brief moments. What a coincidence. A cruel coincidence of fate, of course. Ghost kicked open the door, attracting the attention of some infected people. Throwing a concussion grenade ahead, he readies himself as the grenade exploded, stunning the infected around him, and it was then that he advanced, shooting the infected with a hail of armor-piercing bullets. The infected people fell with speed. However, those insect-like infected would turn invisible and open its huge mouth and spat some kind of greenish liquid in its direction. Ghost dodged it by jumping over the railing of the metal walkway they were on and hit the creature in midair, causing it to fall with a loud thud on the ground below the walkway. A licker jumped it towards him, and Ghost, reacting quickly, leapt off the railing, causing both the creature to pass right straight through him and fall next to the infected on the floor below. Seeing this, Ghost takes a grenade from his tactical vest and throws it towards both infected. As he advanced, he heard hurried footsteps approaching from behind him, but he gritted his teeth as he saw nothing of his sight. It was then that he saw the faint glow, and his instincts kicked in. Throwing his torso backwards and taking a single step backwards, he dodges the claw attack by a hunter. Quickly counterattacking, he takes out his knife and plunges it into the creature's neck, pulling the knife back in one swift motion. He takes the momentum and kicks the hunter to the side, firing the infected that followed along the walkway until his clipper ran out of bullets. Turning to face the hunter, he sidesteps another slashing attack from the claws of the creature, which now was viciously attacking him, as if irritated from the previous attack. The hunter tries a sideways blow, but the agent dodges by ducking. Taking advantage of its own movement, the creature spins its huge body and tries another side attack. However, Ghost dodges by taking 2 steps back, and with his Desert Eagle, hits a fatal shot in the hunter's head, who falls to the ground with a loud thud. Its body was now motionless. After clearing the place of infected, they continue on their way, until one point Ghost stops in front of the double door. I'm going to Wesker. You concentrate on getting her out of here. The location's marked on the map, Ghost said, turning to Claire. If it hadn't been anyone else, he would have not let her go. He was still suspicious about the girl, and it didn't make any sense for her to be there. Apparently fine when the whole lab was infected, especially after finding her so close to the infected subjects. However, considering that Claire wasn't just any human, he would say that she would take care of herself if anything unusual happened. He held back a sigh. He didn't like being like that. Suspicious and wary of a child, it was possible that she was just another victim that filled him with anger. However, he knew well enough that, even if he didn't like it, that child could very well become a monster at any moment. All right, okay, be careful, Claire said. I will say the same to you. If necessary, Redfield, don't hesitate. Don't let your feelings cloud your judgment, he said seriously, before looking deep in Claire's eyes, who seemed to swallow a little saliva and remained quiet for a few moments, but then she nodded. Ghost immediately turned and went through the door, while Claire continued running down the corridor, not noticing the increasingly black veins on the little girl's body. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, Ring the bell for notifications to when I upload, so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.